Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki, Ananda Kodi Vaishnava Vrinda ki, Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur ki, Prem Jagaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda ki, Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gop Gopinath Shama Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan ki, Shri Vrindavan Dham ki, Shri Mayapur Dham ki, Ganga Mai ki, Yamuna Mai ki, Bhakti Devi ki, Tulsi ki, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, Gaura Brahmanande. Text 35. Chapter 3 is entitled Karma Yoga. Do we usually recite the verse? No repeat or... Okay, so I just recite the verse, translation for Shriyan Swadharmo Viguna Paradharmat Svanustita Swadharma Nitanam Shriya Paradharmo Payavaha. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Srila Ki Jai. It is far better to discharge one's prescribed duties, even though faultily, than another's duties perfectly. Destruction in the course of performing one's own duty is better than engaging in another's duties, for to follow another's path is dangerous. Purport. One should therefore discharge his prescribed duties in full Krishna consciousness, rather than those prescribed for others. Materially prescribed duties are duties enjoined according to one's psycho-physical condition, under the spell of the modes of material nature. Spiritual duties are as ordered by the spiritual master for the transcendental service of Krishna. But whether material or spiritual, one should stick to his prescribed duties even up to death, rather than imitate another's prescribed duties. Duties on the spiritual platform and duties on the material platform may be different, but the principle of following the authorized direction is always good for the performer. When one is under the spell of the modes of material nature, one should follow the prescribed rules for his particular situation and should not imitate others. For example, a Brahmana who is in the mode of goodness is non-violent, whereas a Kshatriya who is in the mode of passion is allowed to be violent. As such, for a Kshatriya it is better to be vanquished following the rules of violence than to imitate a Brahmana who follows the principle of non-violence. Everyone has to cleanse his heart by a gradual process, not abruptly. However, when one transcends the modes of material nature and is fully situated in Krishna consciousness, he can perform anything and everything under the direction of a bona fide spiritual master. In that complete state of Krishna consciousness, the Kshatriya may act as a Brahmana, or a Brahmana may act as a Kshatriya. In the transcendental stage, the distinctions of the material world do not apply. For example, Vishwamitra was originally a Kshatriya, but later on he acted as a Brahmana, whereas Parashuram was a Brahmana, but later on acted as a Kshatriya. Being transcendentally situated, they could do so, but as long as one is on the material platform, he must perform his duties according to the modes of material nature. At the same time, he must have full sense of Krishna consciousness. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Shri Vasudeva Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Ram Ram Hare Hare. First of all, thank you for having me here, and I must apologize I'm a little late. The material world is also always filled with faults, and by some arrangement I came a little late, but we're here now, so let's have a look at this. It is far better to discharge one's prescribed duties, even though faultily, than another's duties perfectly. Destruction in the course of performing one's own duty is better than engaging in another's duties, for to follow another's path is dangerous. This Bhagavad Gita is the Song of God. That is what Bhagavad Gita means. And it is about Krishna and Arjuna. They're on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, it's called. And Arjuna is about to engage in warfare against some of his own family members, his own teachers and friends. And this is not a small war. 640 million soldiers lost their lives in this battle. So this is quite a heavy situation, you could say. And it may seem paradoxical that you would have a book called The Song of God. It sounds quite poetical. and then it's about 640 million losing their lives. It seems a little bit odd. But that is actually the lesson of Bhagavad Gita, that whatever material situation we're in is actually not important. Rather, the importance of life is what spiritual situation we're in. So like Prabhupada here is describing that when we're on the material platform, which all of us are, we're identifying with matter. This is me. That's how we think. Then we have to purify ourselves, purify our consciousness, because actually, in reality, this is not what we are. So, when I was born, I was actually in a different body. Modern science is always a little wishy-washy, but they are pretty certain that our human cells have a maximum lifespan of about between 7 and 10 years, depending on who you ask and at what time of the day you ask them. That's always how it is. But nevertheless, I'm 38. So I can't be the molecules that make up my body. Another material identification could be a little more subtle. I could be identifying with the situation I am a monk. That's why when I'm asked to come here and give a class, I would say yes, because I identify with that situation. If someone asked me to fix their car, I would probably say no. But in reality, I might as well have become a car mechanic. It's at least a possibility. And yet, I would still be me. So again, I can't really be a monk. It may be a situation that I'm in at this point. But is it me? No, it's not. What I am is pure consciousness. What all of you are pure consciousness. Everything that is experienced through consciousness. We have this tendency when we're identifying with the material to think that that happiness is somewhere out there. It may be football match. Someone may be very into that and think that when I go to the stadium, that will make me happy. Of course, sometimes your team loses and you're not happy. Another identification could be a nice car, some nice clothes. But the experience is happening in our heads. The experience of the niceness, of the happiness is in our heads. And the externals are merely the tools that we use to obtain that happiness. So the problem with the football team is sometimes they lose. And even if they win, it kind of gets boring, you know. If you're absolutely sure your team is going to win every time, where's the excitement? Your car, it may be very nice, but at some point someone will scratch it, or you'll be in an accident, or even just there's the insurance, all the bills, and your car loses value every day, and in 20, 30 years it's not a flashy new car anymore. It's a pile of rubbish. And with the clothes, I mean, it's like 4 seasons in a year and you're out of fashion within the next summer. So that doesn't work. At least not if we consider happiness a permanent state. And everything we do to obtain happiness. So the Bhagavad Gita tells us that there are 3 symptoms of the soul. 1, it is eternal. It is not subject to these material changes like my body. I am still me, even though my body goes through so many changes. Now I'm 2 meters tall. 25 years ago I wasn't. And in 25 years I'm not, because I'll be walking. You know. So this soul is eternal. And it is full of knowledge. So how do we understand this? Because I don't even know what's going on the other side of that wall. How can the soul be full of knowledge? Well, knowledge is not factual knowledge about material situations, because they're fluctuating and changing all the time anyway, so that knowledge is actually not valuable for an eternal soul. It may be valuable for a temporary conditioning, such as being a monk or having a new car. It may be a good thing that you're able to actually figure out where the key goes and where to put in the petrol, so you don't put it in the glove compartment. But on the spiritual plane, on the eternal platform, that knowledge is not valuable. It's not actual knowledge. So when we say full of knowledge, it means that whatever situation you're put in, you have a valid reaction. A reaction that corresponds with what is going on. And this last of the three qualities that we have for the soul and for the consciousness is that it is full of blissful happiness, spiritual bliss. That means eternal happiness. Happiness that is independent of what is going on. As we were saying just before, the happiness is not in the car. The car may be there, it may ignite the happiness, but the happiness is going on inside us. So if we're able to understand this, then we're able to arrange our lives in such a way that this happiness can come from within, not from without. And when it can come from within, then it can be maintained eternally. If it is coming from without, whatever situation you're in, it's going to change. So this is why we're saying here, discharging duties. Because duty means that you're acting on a level that is higher than just what you're sensing with your senses. Consciousness must be directed at something. Like when you're seeing, you have to be seeing something. You hear something. You don't just hear nothing. And in the same way, whatever the consciousness is directed at through the senses is at something. So the lowest and most temporary area of consciousness where it can be directed is our material senses. What we're seeing, what we're hearing, what we're feeling, tasting and smelling. And above that is the mind, the emotions. So at the bottom you would have your lower animal species. Your very hardcore atheistic scholars are also, they're constantly explaining how we can only know what we can measure in the laboratory. That is the only way of actually experiencing reality. So that they say that there is no consciousness beyond that. But the funny thing is that statement is actually, it excludes itself, because how will you measure that statement in the laboratory? It doesn't work. It just cannot be true. They just destroyed their own philosophy by that statement. So above that, there is the mind with the emotions. We call that extended sense gratification. I am able to derive pleasure or happiness through others' senses. So it's never a good class if at least one telephone doesn't ring. So thank you. So if I say some corny little joke like I just did, and a few of you are smiling and laughing, that can make me happy. This is a little less temporary, because we're dealing with consciousness, so there's the possibility of a lasting relationship here that can give a lot of pleasure. But it is also temporary, because we won't be sitting here forever. I mean, it will stop at some point. Even family members, I mean, we're all going to die at some point, and some before others. So if we're completely dependent on others' senses or the emotion or the attachment to others, that will also eventually cause pain. We see it like mothers when their children grow up. It is very painful that they're leaving. even though it is completely natural and it cannot be in any other way, but because they've invested so many emotions in the upbringing of this child, the detachment from that is painful. No way around it. So above that is the level of the intelligence, or the level of what we call dharma. Dharma is the inherent nature of things. So the dharma of water is that it is wet. If you see water that is not wet, if it's solid, you call it ice. It's not water anymore. The dharma of fire is that it gives off heat and light. So we realize there is an actual way of dealing with things that often in this materialistic society we tend to forget, because we tend to be on the emotional or the purely sensual platform. So you see that I usually use this example of you can use a paintbrush to brush your teeth and a toothbrush to paint your walls, but it does go better if you switch it. So you see often artists, they're doing all sorts of weird things with strange objects, and this is art. But if you really want to get somewhere, usually you would use the car to drive, and you would use the pot to cook. I mean, you could put a lot of spaghetti into the car and put it over the stove, but it just will not work very well. If it's a huge stove, you might get somewhere, but it just doesn't work. So if you just at least accept the fact that anything is created with a purpose, and if you use it for that purpose, you're going to have a better time, generally. Because, as we just discussed, the material energy is temporary, so it is trouble. That is actually just what it is. When we say happiness on the material level, we're talking about the absence of problems. In advertising, you would always combine a product with happiness. So we see that our emotions get triggered and we want that product because we think that product would give us happiness. What are they always showing? They're always showing a beach or some situation where everything is just going on nicely. So it's just, there is a problem, you get the problem goes away, you're happy. So the absence of problems, that is material happiness. Okay, that's great. Now we know how to deal with things, and that means we will get good results. We're using the paintbrush to paint our walls, it goes smoothly, and we have nice walls. And we're dealing properly with people, because we know that dealing nicely with people works out better. I mean, you have gangs, they're kind of like, they have as many rituals as like a Japanese tea party, you know. But what are those rituals? I mean, when I was initiated as a monk, we had a fire sacrifice and we chanted some mantras and we ate a lot of very nice sumptuous prasadam. That was very nice. The Crips in LA, they initiate you and they beat the crap out of you. That's their initiation, you know. So there's always some level of authority, but if you know how to deal with people, it works out nicely. If you don't, I mean, they're not happy, let's just face it, you know. And we are. To a certain extent at least. So now we're getting good results. But the problem is that we get attached to the good results. So when I come here and I'm asked to give a class, I'm happy, and if I give a good class, they're going to ask me again, and I'm happy again. But in the end, I'm going to get used to it. So the day that they don't ask me to give class, I'll be like a little bit miffed, you know, what's up? So the next stage, the fourth stage, is the level of detachment. Figuring out that, wait a minute, okay, even though I'm dealing properly, I'm getting the nice results, it's still temporary because it's still a material result. It's a good result rather than a kind of dodgy result that may go good or bad, but it's still a material result, and as long as I'm attached to the result, then I'm still trying to control the world, and we know that we cannot control the world. We're reminded of it every day. I was like, when I was chanting Radha Madhava, I was like sweating because I've been running to get here because of some strange things that happened. So we cannot control the world. So the level of detachment, figuring out there's a difference between the material situation I'm in and what I am. I am consciousness, and I am consciousness in a material situation. Like someone said, we're not humans having a spiritual experience, we're spirits having a human experience. So the ability to kind of turn reality upside down and see that, wait a minute, the spiritual that many people think are kind of little airy-fairy, that's actually reality, and this is the illusion. But the problem is that then what? Then we just detach ourselves from everything because the material doesn't give us anything anyway, so we're just going to sit in the Himalayas and go, Om. How long are you going to sit there? See, as we said, eternality, knowledge and bliss is the symptoms of the soul. But knowledge entails activity. There must be some activity because how can you have knowledge of something that is inactive? If there's no activity, how can there be knowledge? You have to have knowledge of something. If you have knowledge, you have to be able to obtain it. Because we're not in full knowledge now, and if we can be in full knowledge, that means there must be some activity. The symptom of life is activity. We're doing something. So then what? Then we have Krishna consciousness. That's the highest level, and actually the only real level of consciousness. The other four are, to a certain extent, contaminated by the material energy. And the material energy is what gives us suffering. So if we are able to see that this is a reflection, but it is a reflection of something. You may see something in the mirror, it may not be real. If I scratch my head in the mirror, it's not going to help me. But I'm still there. This is a reflection, but it's a reflection of something real. If you look in a lake and you see a reflection of a tree, the real tree is there. So illusion doesn't mean that nothing exists. It just means that we're seeing it not in connection with Krishna. We're not seeing it in connection with the source of its existence. We're seeing it as something separate, something that is under our control. The nice car is mine, but it's not mine, because in 20 years I won't have it anymore, so it's only there for a moment. So if we're able to see on a higher level of principle that there must be a source for everything, then we can become eternally happy. And we can become happy in whatever situation we are in, because we're able to connect it with the source. And this is why we're meditating, this is why we're having these classes, this is why we're singing nice bhajan and kirtan. Because when we do that, we separate ourselves from the material situation and we're able to look at ourselves from a distance, without the emotions, without the material values that we usually walk around and attribute to whatever is going on. So that is why we're trying to purify ourselves, because we want to get rid of this material contamination. So it is said here that discharging one's duties, and it's described how you may have a brahmana who has one kind of duty and a kshatriya that has another kind of duty. So just to explain that, we have generally 4 different levels of activity on the material plane. At the top you have the level of knowledge, which is the brahmana they're describing here. Giving knowledge to others. And below that you have the level of administration. This is the kshatriya.